to the final steps of my fan making recipe. At this point, the fan we're working with here is a finished out and decorated fan sail. I've cut from my pattern, I've trimmed out with some fluorescent marabou and some spandex cording, and then I've trimmed out the edges here with some grosgrain and decorative ribbon on both sides. And I also have a set of fan ribs that I've made. I've cut the wood, I've reinforced all the ribs with some strapping tape, I've covered them with black adhesive vinyl, I've added on some decor with some fluorescent construction paper, and trimmed out the inner ribs here with a little bit of extra automotive pinstriping for a little added decor. I also, after I finished decorating these ribs, I've drilled holes in them. I have a larger hole here at the hip of the fan, which is 1 inch from the edge of the wood here, and then at 7 inches from the edge we have where the fabric attaches to the rib here, where it begins, and then about 1/4 of an inch from the outer edge here, I have another attach point, and then in between these two I've centered in a third one actually, where this will give the outer ribs a little more of an attachment, considering they take more stress than the inner ribs, which you may notice only have 2 attach points, one at the 7-inch mark and then another about 1/2 inch down from the tip of these ribs. I always, when it comes to attaching the ribs to the fabric, I always sew down the outer ribs first completely, starting at where the fabric starts, the middle point, and then on the end. Once those are attached, I come in with my inner ribs, centering them and spacing them out as I want them, and then sewing them out from the middle outward, attaching all of them down to the inner part, and then beginning to sew the outer parts. You'll find the fabric stays flattened out, centered, non-ruffled. Well, not always, but you'll get a much better end product, I always find. And one little tip that I can pass on is the foam core pattern that I use to cut the fabric with. I find that I like to work with it as a working surface. When I get away from the sewing machine to sit down to do this hand sewing, I find myself in front of the TV, and it works as a great work surface to keep my fan fanned out and from the fabric not folding up while I sit here and do all this hand sewing. So what we'll do first is get a threaded needle here, which I have somewhere. Here we go. And then starting right where the fabric lines up with my first attach point, I will begin my stitch. And there's 2 holes at each one of these attach points. It's going to run my stitch parallel to the rib itself. But on the inner ribs, the stitch will actually go side to side over the outsides of the rib. We'll get to that part next though. So continuing my stitch here, I come out of one hole into the other. And I just keep repeating till I get a nice, good, solid, steady attachment there. And you see I'm going through 2 layers of the grosgrain ribbon, and first I just had the fabric hemmed and would sew to the fabric, but I found that a lot of stuff pulled through, and I began to add the grosgrain as a additional backing to sew through and to attach to, and it's worked wonderfully, taking a lot of wear and tear, especially considering this is where you hold your fans. Can't always find the hole. Going to tie me some little knots here. Help secure the stitch. One on this side, and tie one on the side over here through the stitch. And then first attach, and I'll continue this as I line up my next threaded needle. I will give it a little tug here to get it nice and taut, and attach it there. Once that's attached, I will repeat the process on the third, and then that'll be attached. I will do that off camera, as not to bore you to death, and get this side attached in the exact same manner, and then we'll work our way into the inner ribs for the next part.